Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. Our title for today is Proficiency Testing as a Catalyst for Change to Proficiency-Focused Learning. My name is Andrew Bowen. I am from LTI. We are the exclusive providers of ACTFL language assessments. Our main focus today is going to be, of course, proficiency testing and really taking a deep dive into the data that is rendered by proficiency assessments. While we will be focusing mainly on K through 12 today, we will take a quick look at the full spectrum of ACTFL language assessments that are provided. This is across K through 12, higher ed, and of course well into the corporate, state, local, and federal government world. The probably most commonly used assessment is the ACTFL OPI. We are all very familiar with that. That is used a lot of times for teacher certification. It is used by federal government agencies, so on and so forth. The assessment on which we will be focusing most today is the AAPPL, the AAPPL. This is ACTFL's most commonly used K through 12 language assessment. And it is really a pedagogically focused assessment, really looking at the scaffolding, the steps towards proficiency that we like to see our students taking as they make their way through our either dual language immersion programs or world language programs in middle school and or high school. Again, it's important to note that the AAPPL, the AAPPL, is really just the beginning of the language assessment journey. ACTFL does provide a wide array of assessments that cover not only K through 12, but also higher ed and several different industries as well. The three topics we will be covering today are going to really answer the question that we see up top there. What role can assessment play? First and foremost, we will be taking a look at assessment for placement. A little bit later, we will be looking at assessment as benchmarking, and assessment of programming, and really taking a close look at the washback effect that proficiency-based assessment can have on language learning programs. And last but certainly not least, we will be looking at assessment for recognition. Spoiler alert, we will be focusing on the seal of biliteracy there. So looking at an assessment like the AAPPL as essentially a summative assessment, which has seen growth over the past 4 or 5 years as the importance of the seal of biliteracy has heightened. However, again, our main focus today will be the AAPPL as a formative assessment and looking at, again, what the data can do as far as enhancing our program and making sure that our students are on that right trajectory towards proficiency and in order to reach their goals, which a lot of times is going to be that seal of biliteracy. So looking at those intermediate mid to intermediate high ranges by the time that they are high school juniors and seniors. To begin, assessment for placement. Over on the left here, we have an example from a particular district that has used the ACTFL sub-levels of proficiency from the ACTFL Proficiency Scale to essentially set up the not only goals for the end of the language courses that they have within their program, but also to set up their placement requirements, right? So many K through 12 districts, schools, even state level will have students coming at us from other districts, other states. Other times, the transition of our own students from elementary school to middle school, from middle school to high school. There's not always a ton of communication between those elementary schools and the middle schools and then the middle schools and high schools. So it's really great to have a consistent way of looking at our students' abilities. And what better than an ACTFL proficiency rating to provide that? Not just one ACTFL proficiency rating, but actually 4. So looking at the 4 separate skills, speaking, listening, reading, and writing, what can this student do, whether the student has learned the language inside of the classroom, and even within the classroom. Was it a dual language immersion program? Was it a quote-unquote traditional classroom? All kinds of different programs out there. Or did the student learn this language outside of the classroom? Is he or she a native or heritage speaker, so on and so forth? What these proficiency-based assessments do is provide all these students, no matter their experience as far as how they came upon this proficiency in the language, but it provides them with a way to show that proficiency, and it provides us from the academic side of things to place them into language programs appropriately. This conversation always leads me to think of the chart that's over on the right, which comes from, I believe, the ACTFL performance descriptors, and it's looking at time as a critical component for developing language performance and proficiency. A lot of times we can look at our programs and see, okay, so if our students are taking 2 years of quote-unquote traditional classroom language courses, then we can expect around that novice mid to novice high range of proficiency as they exit out of a program like that. However, as most language educators do, we are going to encourage our students to stick with these language learning programs for 3 years, 4 years, maybe even 5, 6, or beyond years. One of the main reasons for that is, of course, again, looking at this chart right here, right? So if we expand that time in which students are focusing on and studying language and being exposed to this second or third language, we're going to greatly increase their odds of entering into that intermediate range and then getting into the advanced level range. To take a quick look at the logistics of an assessment like the AAPPL, this is important in the scope of placement because it really is a truly simple assessment to administer. This is a 100% online assessment. There's nothing to download. There are no hoops to jump through. What I'm able to do as an educator is I have an account that is free, and I'm able to essentially administer at will. I'm going to go ahead and point out once again that the AAPPL does have 4 separate sections, right? So speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And it is the only K-12 language assessment out there that does cover all 3 modes of communication. It's important to highlight this because, of course, the speaking section is an interpersonal listening and speaking section. We will get into how all of that works here in a couple of minutes. Another important aspect to point out is the fact that each of those 4 components of the AAPPL are completely independent of one another. So if I'm looking at placement, if I'm looking at just starting with a proficiency testing program, or if I'm looking at testing maybe my younger kids, what I'm able to do is I can just choose one of these sections, right? If I just want to get some proficiency data on my students' writing skills, I can administer just the writing section. It's a $5 section, administer it to my students and get some of that proficiency data rolling in. A lot of programs will kind of add on to that, right? So they will begin with 1 section. Next year, they'll do 2 sections. Next year, they'll do 3 or 4. Lots of different things that can happen here, but it's important to point out that the AAPPL does have that flexibility, and I, as an educator, can choose whether it's for placement or progress monitoring, so on and so forth. I can choose to administer the assessment in kind of chunks or bits and pieces. Even in cases where I am administering all 4 sections, a nice feature, again, is to be able to spread those across several different days. So one day I can administer the speaking section, the next day reading, the next day listening, so on and so forth. Each of the sections take about 30 minutes to complete. So again, it can be 1, 2, or 2.5 hour window, or 30 minutes. Quick look at how the AAPPL assessment looks through the eyes of the students. How in the world do we collect this proficiency data, right? Over on the right is a quick system check where students, again, this is all online. It can be administered on any assessment, on any device. So any desktop, any laptop, Chromebooks are included, as well as tablets. Regardless, I'm able to, as the student or as the teacher or administrator ahead of time, make sure that these devices are up and running and all systems are go by using this AAPPL Measure System Check. It checks the bandwidth. It allows me to play around with the microphone and the audio. Also allows me to play around with the keyboarding, which is nice. Some students may not be too used to typing in the language in which they'll be taking the APPL. So they're able to click through the easy-to-use toolbox here for special characters, or if the student is taking the assessment for Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, Japanese, what they're able to do is access the keyboards that they'll be using. So for example, for Mandarin Chinese, the most commonly used keyboard is Pinyin. Next screen that I see as the student is top left right there. So I'm able to see those 4 sections. In this case, all 4 sections have been ordered for me. Again, it may be a case where the teacher or administrator has ordered just one section. In that case, I will just see that one section. Bottom left, I am able to see a teacher intro video. This is a quick 1-minute video that allows the teacher to really introduce, hey, this is going to be the listening section. You're going to see this, this, and that. You can do this, this, and that. It gives a couple of tips to be able to complete these sections successfully. Again, a quick walkthrough through each of the sections. Interpersonal listening and speaking. This is a 30-minute simulated live chat, right? So I, as the student, see a native/heritage speaker of the language on the screen there. I am engaged in a 30-minute interview. It is 18 prompts back and forth, back and forth. I, as the student, am in the target language the entire time. I'm answering questions. I'm being prompted to ask questions back. What is rendered is a 30-minute speaking sample. That speaking sample is then sent to ACTFL certified raters for rating. We'll talk about that rating process here in a little bit. To take a quick look at the interpretive mode of communication, over on the left is a sample from the French interpretive reading task. So it is a short, digestible reading prompt there. I'm able to drag and drop the images based on what I have read in the target language. Over on the right, I will have listened to this teacher. This is from the Mandarin Chinese APPL and the listening, interpretive listening section. I will have listened to the teacher in the target language, and I will be dragging and dropping those red buttons based on what I have heard in the target language. Last but not least, we have the presentational writing section. This has 7 prompts in which I'm responding to really modern contexts. So looking at blog posts, looking at social media messages, hey, respond to this, respond to that in the target language. As mentioned previously, we do have the special character and keyboarding functionality available for students right there. So getting into the fun stuff, what do students get? And then I will dive into the data that we are able to enjoy as educators. And the proficiency-based models that a lot of districts and schools have adopted with the APPL as a catalyst. Over on the right is a sample of the APPL score report that each and every student receives. As we see, each of the 4 skills, each of the modes of communication are rated separately, right? So we have a proficiency rating for each of these students, which is important. Looking at the score description, so an example, looking at the score up top there, that's the interpersonal listening and speaking score, looks like that's a novice high. So, score description, what in the world does novice high mean for interpersonal listening and speaking? There's a full-on description there based completely on the ACTFL can-do statements and ACTFL World Readiness Standards that essentially says this student has demonstrated that he or she can do this, can do that. Perhaps limitations are here and there. To take things a step farther, there is the strategy column over on the right. This provides a little bit of guidance. So novice high is great, but what can we be doing as educators? What can we be doing as students to make sure that we are reaching those intermediate low, maybe even intermediate mid levels the next time we take it? So again, this is an informative score report, but it is also productive, right? The APPL was created by ACTFL in order to be a pedagogically focused assessment. Again, it is wonderful that it's being used as a summative assessment for the seal of biliteracy, but it was really originally built for us to kind of build that scaffolding and to take these score reports and build upon the data that we've collected to look at next year and the next time the students are taking the assessment to make sure that we have these students on the right trajectory towards our proficiency goal. New last year is what we see on the left. Every single student, no matter the age, no matter the scores that they get on the APPL, receives this ACTFL certificate. right? So it does indicate the language in which the assessment was taken. It indicates the section or sections of the assessment that were taken as well. There's also a little verification code. We've seen students apply for internships or summer jobs, or even apply to academic programs or college, and they will use these verification codes, these certificates and verification codes, to say, hey, this is a certified proficiency level that I have. This is a tangible skill that I have, and that can be used in the workplace. Here's the scale on which the AAPPL is rated. As you can see, it comes directly from the ACTFL Proficiency Scale. ACTFL developed this AAPPL scale in order to provide a bit more of a granular look into student proficiency levels and their journey towards those higher proficiency levels. As you will see, there are 2 novice mid sublevels. There are also 3 intermediate mid sublevels. Reason for that is, again, to provide that granularity. If I'm a student, as we all know, it is pretty difficult to make that transition from novice mid to novice high. If I take a proficiency-based assessment year after year and I see novice mid, I'm probably going to be a bit discouraged. My teachers may be discouraged. But in this case with the AAPPL, what we can see is movement within that sublevel, right? So I see movement from N2 to N3. I'm still within novice mid, but we can see that I have moved closer to that novice high level. So all of this is, of course, extremely valuable as we take a look at our students growing throughout the years in their language proficiency. A quick look at the languages in which the AAPPL is currently available. There are 13 languages available for the AAPPL. There's also the LIRA, which is a Latin reading proficiency assessment. Looking quickly at sealed by literacy, that will be our last topic for today. But while we're on languages, ACTFL has released an OPI/WPT bundle for less commonly taught languages, right? So for students who are coming to us and say, hey, all of my friends are earning the sealed by literacy for Spanish and French and Mandarin Chinese. I've been speaking Turkish my entire life. Can I earn the sealed by literacy too? We do provide the OPIWPT bundle pricing for users of the AAPPL. So that expands the languages in which the sealed by literacy is available by 22 less commonly taught languages listed right there. Now we get to the fun stuff. So back to that original question, what role can assessment play? The meat of today's session is going to be just this, assessment as a benchmark, and really looking at the data that we are collecting and the transitions to a proficiency focus that we are able to see within language programs. Again, looking at K through 12 with the AAPPL here, but we are also seeing this in higher ed, as well as adult learning in the federal government. So the frequency with which we are administering proficiency-based assessment really does have an effect. In fact, the washback effect on our language programming. Over on the left, we see just one example. This is a district up in Illinois where they were able to take a quick look at students as they graduate from level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 within a K through 12 program, really taking an in-depth look. And this is, of course, focusing on just reading skills, right? And we will look at several other examples like this. But as we see, level 2, we are seeing the majority there at intermediate low right there. And then looking at level 4, there's really a huge shift towards that intermediate high level, which is going to earn students that sealed by literacy in the vast majority of the states. Before we get into the widespread reporting, it's also nice to look at our students individually. We already looked at the score report that is provided to students, and of course we can sit down with students and go over those reports, go over those proficiency ratings. Another great thing that we can do from the educator side is go into the portal. This is the same portal from which I have ordered these AAPPL assessments. And I'm able to see these scores bubbling up. This is whether students have taken the assessment in school or from home, which we will talk about later. So I'm able to see the data here. I'm able to see all the proficiency ratings across across languages, across administrations, looking at the dates, and then across students. I can also hone in on one student, right? I can search by first name, last name. I can search by language. I can search by mode of communication. I can also filter out by grade or grade level or gender. There are plenty of things that I can do in this portal here. But the one thing that I really wanted to point out today is what is circled in red there. A great teaching tool that I have seen districts use is just this. So not only am I able to see the scores of these students, but those speaking samples and writing samples, which again were sent to ACTFL certified raters for rating on that ACTFL scale. I'm able to click these icons, right? So you see the little speaker icon next to the speaking samples, and then of course the little icon next to the writing ratings. I'm able to click on those icons and listen to what students said on test day. I'm able to read through their writing samples. I've seen teachers, I've seen administrators sit down with students, listen to what was said, read through what was written, and say, this was great. This was, a novice high demonstration of proficiency. What could we do to really, to build upon that scaffolding, right? To advance into that intermediate low level, and really make sure that next time we take the apple, we are able to see progress in our proficiency. So again, really valuable data there. Now we'll go ahead and jump into the national data reporting and comparison tools that come, again, as part of this AAPPL portal for all educators administering these ACTFL assessments. First, we will go ahead and take a look at data broken down by district. There are a million different filters that I can apply to this. I can open it up and look at all students and compare all students to national averages. But what I've done here is I have gone ahead and applied a couple of filters. You'll see in the top right there that I have, I decided to look at just students who took it for Spanish and just sixth graders, right? Again, I could open it up to all languages. I could look at students who took French. I could look at students who are in middle school or whatever it may be. But for example's sake, what we have here, and again, separated out by skill, by mode of communication, are those blue bars. Those blue bars are my students. And again, this is the average of all of those students who took it for Spanish and are sixth graders. Over on the left is the interpersonal listening and speaking section. Next is presentational writing, then interpretive listening, then interpretive reading. So again, I'm able to see all of my students kind of averaged together here. Those orange dots are the national average with those same filters applied, right? So of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of students who are taking the AAPPL throughout the nation and internationally, I'm able to apply those same filters, Spanish, sixth graders, and compare my students to them. Just for knowledge sake, just to see how my students are stacking up against those national averages. Pretty nice to see. Here's an example from a district down in Louisiana. What we are looking at here is comparing students by grade level, right? So again, we are taking groups of students and kind of grouping them together and taking a look at kind of an eagle-eye view of this proficiency data. So this was a district supervisor who came up to us, who had been administering the AAPPL, fortunately, but had concerns about students' transition from elementary school to middle school. She had great confidence in the fact that students' proficiency was seeing great gains with the elementary school program, but wasn't quite sure about that transition to middle school. So what they were able to do here, using AAPPL proficiency data, is really take a close look at year by year. So the light blue bars are going to be fifth graders, dark blue sixth graders, light green seventh grade, orange eighth grade. Step by step, year by year, are our students making that progress year after year in order to eventually reach those proficiency goals that we have for them, whether it's for the seal of biliteracy or another type goal that we have. What they found is circled in red there, that in fact there was a drop-off, especially with the productive skills, once students transitioned from 6th grade to 7th grade. So what they were able to do here was essentially a resource share, get those elementary school and middle school instructors together and make sure that they were sharing resources, the same scope on proficiency, and really kind of bridge that gap between elementary school language learning and middle school language learning. They have seen great progress because of that, and it was something that this proficiency data was most certainly able to help out with. Next, we have a language-to-language comparison. This is an interesting one because this is done on the school level, right? So within my school, what I'm able to do is I'm able to compare on the left the students who have taken it for Mandarin Chinese to the students on the right who have taken it for French. Again, separated out by skill, right? So I can see dark purple, interpersonal listening and speaking, presentational writing is the lighter purple, I guess we'll say, or pink, and then interpretive listening, then interpretive reading. Again, super interesting to see it separated out by skill like that, because I'm able to really delve into the data and figure out, where my students are first and foremost excelling, and second of all, where they might need a little bit of help to kind of even out the proficiency levels across modes of communication. What we see over on the left, Chinese, they are doing great, right? They are exceeding national averages across all 4 skills, across all modes of communication, well on that track to those CELO biliteracy requirement levels. Over on the right with French, something very interesting happened here. So looking at interpersonal listening and speaking, we can see that that is through the roof, right? That on average, they are at the intermediate high level, which is either at or beyond CELO biliteracy requirements for most states. Interestingly enough, though, if you look 2 bars over, the interpretive listening skills are lagging behind a little bit. So what do we do here? Perhaps we take a look at, authentic, semi-authentic audio that students are listening to, some other resources that will have students, hearing different people speaking in the target language, perhaps different dialects, so we can really train our students' ears so that we can make sure that their interpretive listening skills are going to catch up with those other skills that they're clearly gaining thanks to our program. Another kind of report that is actually new as of this year is a longitudinal report. This is wonderful because as opposed to the other graphs and charts that we've seen, in this case, we're actually focusing on just one student, right? So if I have a student who has come to me, let's say I'm a 10th grade Spanish teacher. In this case, let's say I'm a 9th grade Spanish teacher. I have a student coming to me, I can go ahead and see how that student has progressed year after year, right? So we see highlighted with that red outline there, this one student, right, took the apple in 2017, 2018, 2019, and I can see how much progress that one student made year after year. I can also see, it just so happens that the student did stay at the same school. But if that student has switched schools, we can also see that transition, right? So back to that topic of, the transition from elementary school to middle school to high school, we can get some insight there as well. And once again, this student has done wonderfully. We look at that 2019 Apple administration, I-5, intermediate high, all the way across the board. So in this case, of course, we can really focus, have a bit more of a, high level proficiency focus, maybe start looking at, but continue looking at literature studies, cultural studies in the target language. This student is certainly ready for that. On the other hand, if we do see that, one skill is lagging behind a little bit, or, across all 4 skills, a student is in that, that novice range or whatever it may be, I know that. Even before the student has come to me. So kind of back to that placement and progress monitoring, kind of a combination of the two. before I even meet the student. I have some insight as to where that student's proficiency lies and how far that student's proficiency has come thanks to the other educators within my program. Here's another look at another district that went through a pretty big curriculum redevelopment. And what we see here is there was, of course, proficiency testing before the curriculum redevelopment and then proficiency testing after, right? What we see in this chart is, the light blue was the before new curriculum proficiency testing, and the light blue is the after proficiency testing. After curriculum adjustment, redevelopment, proficiency testing. And what we see here, again, we always want to see tangible evidence of our students' growth, but it's also nice to see tangible evidence of changes that we make within our program. So in this case, this district did make significant changes to really have a proficiency focused program. And what they were able to show is tangible evidence for all students, right, across all languages and across all levels, the effect that that curriculum change had, which was super valuable for these educators as they kind of bubble up the results of these changes to the powers that be. Of course, it's always nice to show a chart like this that says, hey, our curriculum changes have really had an effect on students. Look at this great data that we've got, so on and so forth. Okay, so we will go ahead and transition now to assessment for recognition. And of course, the main focus of this this part of the session is going to be the seal of biliteracy. Over on the right, we see lots of students very excited about their certificates, their AAPPL scores, and of course the seals of biliteracy that they have earned thanks to that thanks to their AAPPL scores. And over on the left, the bottom left, we see that, the seal of biliteracy is an actual seal, right? That is a seal that is going on the diplomas of these students. It is going on the transcripts of these students. It is something that shows the progress that students have made in their proficiency. Once again, either in our K through 12 language learning programs or outside of those programs. So again, in addition to the students in these language programs, also the native and heritage speakers of different languages who are earning the seal of biliteracy as well. The seal of biliteracy is for those who are not already familiar, it is a widespread phenomenon that has really had a great impact across the nation. Here we see a map. All of the navy blue states are states that have passed official legislation as far as the seal of biliteracy goes. The other states that remain do have, they are works in progress. They are working towards getting that legislation passed. As far as the benefits go, looking at the seal of biliteracy, of course, the value of language learning. We are seeing students who are, at the beginning of the session, we talked about, some of those two-year, two-level, language requirements that, again, as a former language educator myself, it's like nails on a chalkboard, right? We're always pushing our students to, go beyond what is just required, right? So we want to see our students study language for more than 2 years, more than 3 years, more than 4 years. And if they have already attained a level of proficiency in one language, to jump to another language. You're already proficient in Spanish? Well, great. We have a wonderful French program. Let's go ahead and make sure that you are trilingual or, multilingual. We're seeing students earn dual, triple, quadruple seals of biliteracy. So cool to see. So not only looking at the value of language learning, but again, to affirm native and heritage languages. It's great to see students who are proud of the languages that they speak, not only proud of them, but also using these seals of biliteracy, using these certifications to go on to the next steps in their lives, right? Whether it's college or into employment, they are able to say, okay, I am proficient in this language. This shows my certification. Hire me now, accept me into this college or university now. There are several higher education institutions that are even providing free college credit to students who come in with seals of biliteracy. At the very least, aiding with the placement process into higher education language programs. Perhaps most importantly, all of us as language educators, we always like to focus on preparing students with those critical 21st century skills necessary to function in a global society. The language skills that our students have are truly valuable and truly sought after. I will show you some examples of how much they are sought after here in a little bit. But again, it's really great to see kind of the full spectrum of language proficiency assessment, guiding our students to the glory land and really putting these languages to use professionally. As a quick reminder, as we continue discussing the Seal of Biliteracy, these are the ACTFL assessments that are being used for students to earn the Seal of Biliteracy. Of course, we have talked a lot about the AAPPL today. The AAPPL is available in 13 languages with American Sign Language in development. There's also the ALIRA for Latin. We quickly touched on that OPIWPT Seal of Biliteracy Bundle that is provided by ACTFL for those 22 less commonly taught languages. And then, of course, there's the tried and true, standard OPI. The OPI is available in, believe it or not, over 120 different languages. You see that see more information link there. I will, of course, be uploading this entire presentation to be shared with everyone at NECTFL. So you can certainly have that to look forward to. I always like to share this slide, which shows the 2019 National Report. We did just see the 2020 Seal of Biliteracy National Report, and believe it or not, pandemic or not, we did see increased numbers for students earning the Seal of Biliteracy in 2020, which is also great to see. Looking in depth at the 2019 Seal of Biliteracy report, what ended up happening was, when this report came out, there were almost 100,000 students who would earn the Seal of Biliteracy, but for 2019, they did end up eclipsing 6 figures, so over 100,000 students, and well over 100,000 students for 2020 who earned the Seal of Biliteracy. Believe it or not, 66 languages in which the Seal of Biliteracy was earned nationwide for 2019. That did increase for 2020 as well. Looking state by state, which is also nice to see those state by state numbers over on the left. California did come in first place with over 55,000 students who earned the Seal of Biliteracy. State of Washington had the most diverse languages, looking at 59 languages total in which students earned the Seal of Biliteracy in 2019. Great. So back to looking at proficiency assessment as a catalyst. And really kind of merging it with merging proficiency assessment as a catalyst to proficiency models and looking at the Seal of Biliteracy, right? So many programs, one of the most wonderful things about the Seal of Biliteracy is we now have our end game. We now have our goal, right? So depending on the state, most Seal of Biliteracy requirements are intermediate high or intermediate mid across all 4 skills, all 3 modes of communication, right? So again, now we have our goals. Now we know that by the time our students become juniors and seniors, we want them to have that intermediate mid, intermediate high level of proficiency, again, evenly across all modes of communication. So what can we do as a program? What can I do as a language educator to make sure that I've got my students on the right track to reach those proficiency goals? Of course, number 1, measuring progress regularly, right? If I only begin the proficiency assessment process by the time my students are seniors, many of them, sure, I hopefully will earn the Seal of Biliteracy, but some of them might not. And at that point, if they are not yet seniors, right, we can start to take a look at, okay, so where do we need improvement, right? Heritage learners, students who have learned the language in our K-12 programs, On which skills should we focus? On which modes of communication should we focus in order to make sure that the next time this student takes this assessment, he or she is going to earn the seal of biliteracy. It's also important to set realistic goals, right? So again, if I have students who have only taken 2 years of, let's say, Spanish, for example, is it realistic for them to be able to show proficiency at that intermediate mid-level? Unless it's a, well, probably not. I will go ahead and say, but probably not after 2 years, unless it's a complete immersion program or some kind of special program where students are really shooting up that proficiency scale. But again, also important to set realistic goals. It's also really nice to reward and acknowledge progress along that long road to proficiency. As I mentioned when we were looking at that proficiency scale, it's really tough to move from novice mid to novice high, from novice high to intermediate low. Even those sublevels within the sublevels that the AAPPL was able to show. It's difficult to do that, and the progress that we're able to see there should be rewarded and acknowledged, right? So at the very least, we've got those certificates that we're able to hang on the fridge at home, but we're seeing plenty of schools and districts that are having ceremonies at the end of the semester or end of the year, where they are essentially rewarding these certificates. We're seeing schools with a wall of fame, right next to the students who have accomplishments, perhaps in sports or other, extracurricular activities. There will be a wall of fame of students who have earned the seal of biliteracy or who have reached a certain level of proficiency, which once again is so very cool to see. Practice, right? So the more our students are using the language and of course exposed to the language, the higher their proficiency level will be. It's also interesting to look at this second to last bullet, right? So if my goal is for my students to be at that intermediate mid level, it's important for me to look at what intermediate mid means, but also what intermediate high means. If we look at the meaning of proficiency, right, what these ACTFL certified raters are looking for as they rate all of these speaking and writing samples, we are looking for consistent demonstration of proficiency at that level, right? So a student who ends up earning an intermediate mid may have shown glimpses of intermediate high, right? Just like a student who has earned intermediate low may have shown glimpses of intermediate mid throughout those speaking or writing samples. So it's important for us as we set our goals to be sure to push our students, right? Even if our goal is intermediate mid, we want to take a look at those intermediate high levels with the ACTFL can-do statements and even the AAPPL score reports that we'll look at on the next slide to make sure that we're giving our students exposure to those opportunities to really let their proficiency shine. And of course, making sure students are ready for test day, but we're all familiar with that. So looking a little bit more closely at that intermediate mid at that I3 on the AAPPL. This is all public domain, right? So there are actually full-on AAPPL score descriptions that show, and I cannot recommend this resource highly enough for educators to take a look at these because it really shows me what do I want my students to be able to do in the language in order to, be able to demonstrate their proficiency at that intermediate mid-level or intermediate high or whatever it may be. My goals may be for the student. Right in the middle right there, we're able to look at the interpersonal mode of communication. All right, so I want my students to be able to maintain conversations about themselves and their lives, express their own thought, connect sentences. And it's so interesting to look at, these score descriptions level by level from, novice low to novice mid, novice high into the intermediate range to really look at the scaffolding that those ACTFL resources are so great at providing for us. The ACTFL can-do statements, the ACTFL world readiness standards. Novice low levels where, essentially we're able to create lists, right? We're able to express some ideas in the language. As we progress through those sub-levels, we're able to then, connect some of those words, form sentences. We're then able to connect some of those sentences and create paragraphs. so on and so forth. So again, the more deeply we're able to look at these resources, the better off our students are going to be, because we are going to know exactly where we want them to be by the end of the semester, end of the year. As far as field biliteracy advocacy goes, this ACTFL report, the Lead with Languages initiative that ACTFL is running, is a wonderful resource. And this is something that can be shared with language people or non-language people, right? The reason there being, I used to have students come up to me all the time and say, why am I taking a Spanish class? I'm not going to use this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I would have loved to have this resource, because this shows, based on a legitimate survey, legitimate research that was done, that 9 out of 10 U.S. employers rely on employees with language skills other than English. This is not just linguists. This is not just translators or interpreters or language teachers. If you look over on the left, the top 5 departments are customer service, sales, marketing, management, IT. So, you know, that cranky student who comes up to me and says, I'm going to be a CEO one day. Why do I need to? Well, cranky student, guess what number 4 is on the list? Management. You want to be a good CEO. You want to be able to serve more customers and, you know, have an international business flow. Well, it's those Spanish skills that you are learning right now are going to come in very handy. As far as resources for educators go, there is a ton of them. Over on the right here, we see a new resource that was released by ACTFL this year. These are student-focused and or parent-focused resources. So my students are about to take the APPL. What do they need to know about it? This is a short, concise PDF with links that can be shared with students. Again, those APPL score descriptors. The APPL Communication Builder is another great resource that ACTFL provides to really build those proficiency skills, whether students are in the classroom or outside of the classroom. I'm going to have to fast forward a little bit. Looking in the interest of time, looks like we have just a couple minutes left. I cannot recommend highly enough if you are interested in the APPL. If you are not interested in the APPL and want to learn more about a proficiency focus in K-12 programs, anybody can become an APPL rater, right? Most APPL raters are language educators to some degree. Others are federal government linguists, so on and so forth. But I highly recommend becoming an ACTFL certified rater. The training is taken care of by ACTFL. It is all online. You are able to learn the ins and outs of what am I listening for? What am I looking out for in student writing samples? In the context of, you know, becoming, of course, an APPL rater and, you know, being paid per APPL that you are rating, but also in the context of your own classroom. I have heard countless times where educators become ACTFL certified to be APPL raters, and it applies to the classroom. They are then kind of honing their ears, honing their eyes in on you know, what they can focus on for their students as, again, they kind of work towards those proficiency levels that are the goals. Very quickly, we're going to look at, and this could be its own session in and of itself, but the options that we now have in order to administer these ACTFL language assessments. Historically, they were all administered in school, so in the classroom, in language labs, in cafeterias, so on and so forth. But now, thanks to this lovely pandemic, we have developed at-home testing options for you. I'm going to go ahead and show a quick summary chart that shows these options that you have available to you. There is the parent/guardian proctoring model, which is free of any additional charge. There is also the computer/virtual proctoring model that has a small fee, but we are able to connect students directly with a webcam that actually takes a face scan and is able to monitor the students as they complete the assessment. There are wonderful resources for these at-home testing options as well. The best resources, of course, are the webinars that we have already recorded with educators who have already been through the experience of administering these ACTFL assessments either in the classroom or remotely, right? So for example, out-of-school testing, that one was done by ACTFL themselves. Over on the right, awarding the seal of Biliteracy with ACTFL assessments. These two educators from New Jersey and Iowa are able to recount their experiences administering those ACTFL assessments remotely. They're about 1 hour each. So again, great resources there. I would like to thank you for attending today's session. Apologies for the fast forward there at the end there, but I really do hope that you enjoyed it. My email is right there on the screen. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And of course, happy to address any follow-up comments, follow-up items that you may have. Once again, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to your feedback.